Lee Tae-min stood at attention in the briefing room and watched as beings he had only seen in training videos filled the seats around him. The room smelled like metal and something sweet that made his nose twitch. Commander Vexathari moved to the front of the room, and her crystalline body caught the light from above. She was tall and looked like she was made from blue glass that never broke. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Welcome to Alpha Squad," she said, and looked at each soldier in turn. "We are the best fighters from 6 different worlds, and we work together to keep the galaxy safe." Taemin nodded and tried not to stare at Sergeant Balnith, who sat 3 chairs away. The sergeant had no real body that Taemin could see, but instead looked like a cloud of green light that moved and changed shape. Sometimes the light made patterns that hurt to look at directly. Lieutenant Kim So-ra sat next to Taemin, and she was the only other human in the room. Her presence made him feel less alone among these strange beings. "Our next mission will take us to the Outer Rim where enemy forces have been seen," Commander Vexathari continued. "We expect this operation to last about 40 years, but it could stretch to 60 if the enemy proves more stubborn than usual." Taemin felt his stomach drop, but he kept his face calm. 40 years meant he would be an old man when they returned if he lived that long. He wanted to ask questions, but the other soldiers seemed to accept this timeline without concern. Private Park Jin-woo, who sat behind him, did not react at all. "To the news. The enemy has been building bases in that sector for the last 300 years, the commander said. "We destroyed their main facility in 2847, but they rebuilt it stronger than before. Some of you were there for that first attack." Several of the alien soldiers nodded, and one made a sound that might have been agreement. Taemin realized that some of his squad mates had been fighting this war since before his country existed. The thought made him feel very small and very young. "Corporal Lee," Commander Vexathari said, and looked directly at him. "Your species is new to our alliance, but your military records show promise. What do you think about long-term siege tactics?" Taemin cleared his throat and tried to think of a good answer. "A siege that lasts decades would require careful planning for supply lines and troop rotation," he said. "Soldiers need rest and replacement over such a long period." The commander tilted her head in a way that reminded Taemin of a curious bird. "Replacement?" she asked. "Are human soldiers damaged easily in combat?" "Not damaged exactly," Taemin said, and felt heat rise in his cheeks. "But humans need breaks from fighting or they become less effective over time." Sergeant Balneth made a sound like static electricity, and his green light pulsed brighter. "How curious," the sergeant said in a voice that seemed to come from inside Taemin's head. "Do human soldiers require regular maintenance like mechanical equipment?" Lieutenant Kim So-ra shifted in her seat, and Taemin could tell she was uncomfortable too. "Humans need rest and food and medical care," she said. "We also have limited service terms." "Limited how?" asked a soldier whose name Taemin could not pronounce. This being looked like a giant insect made from black metal and moved with clicking sounds. "Most human soldiers serve for a few years, then return to civilian life," Kim So-ra explained. "Some serve longer, but even career soldiers eventually retire." The aliens looked at each other, and Taemin heard several different sounds that might have been laughter. Commander Vexathari made a musical noise that sounded almost like singing. "How refreshingly cautious," she said. "Your species must be very careful about preserving resources. We appreciate such wisdom in new allies." Taemin felt confused, but did not want to ask more questions and seem ignorant. The briefing continued with details about enemy positions and weapon capabilities. He took notes and tried to focus on the tactical information, but his mind kept returning to the timeline. 40 years felt like a lifetime to him, because it was, nearly half of one. After the briefing ended, The soldiers began to leave, and Commander Vexithari approached Tae-min and Kim So-ra. "I want to learn more about human military customs," she said. "Perhaps you could join me for a meal and explain your interesting practices." They followed her to a dining area that looked nothing like any restaurant Tae-min had ever seen. The tables were made from some kind of living wood that grew into chair shapes when they sat down. Other alien species sat at various tables and ate things that glowed or moved or made sounds. "Tell me about human food rituals," Commander Vexithari said as they sat down. "I notice you consume matter several times each day. Is this part of your military discipline?" Tae-min looked at Kim So-ra, who seemed as puzzled as he felt. "Humans need to eat food to survive," Kim So-ra said slowly. "We convert food into energy for our bodies." "Fascinating," the commander said. "And you do this multiple times per day. Such dedication to your energy conversion ceremonies. How often do you perform the sleeping ritual?" "Sleeping is not a ritual," Tae-min said. "Humans need about 8 hours of sleep each day, or we cannot function properly." Commander Vexithari leaned forward, and her crystalline features seemed to shimmer with interest. "Every day?" she asked. "Your species must be very spiritual to perform these ceremonies so regularly. Do all humans follow the same schedule for these energy rituals?" Tae-min began to realize that something was very wrong with this conversation, but he could not figure out what. "All humans need food and sleep," he said. "Our bodies require these things to stay alive." "Alive." The commander repeated the word like she was tasting something strange. "You use that word differently than we do. For us, alive simply means existing and thinking and acting, but you seem to mean something more specific." Kim So-ra looked worried now, and Tae-min could see her mind working to understand what was happening. "Commander," she said carefully, "how long do most species in the Alliance live?" "Live," Commander Vexithari said, and made that musical sound again. "What an odd question. We exist until we choose not to, or until something destroys us completely. I have been conscious for about 12,000 years, and I am still quite young by the standards of my people." Tae-min felt the blood drain from his face, and the room seemed to spin around him. 12,000 years was longer than recorded human history. He looked at the other aliens in the dining area and realized that any one of them might be older than human civilization. "How long do humans typically exist?" Commander Vexithari asked, with genuine curiosity. Kim So-ra opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tae-min felt a cold fear growing in his chest as he began to understand the true scale of what they had gotten into. These beings thought humans were like them. They thought humans lived for thousands of years and could survive almost anything. They had no idea that the two humans sitting at this table would be dead and gone while the commander was still young. "Perhaps we should discuss this later," Kim So-ra finally managed to say. "We should report to our quarters and prepare for tomorrow's training." Commander Vexithari nodded agreeably. "Of course, you must need time for your energy conversion ceremonies. How delightfully organized your species is." As they walked back to their quarters, Tae-min felt like he was moving through a dream. Everything around him seemed too big and too strange and too permanent. The corridor they walked through had probably been here longer than Korea had been a country. The aliens they passed had seen empires rise and fall while humans were still learning to farm. "We have a problem," Kim So-ra whispered when they were alone. "They think we are like them," Tae-min said. "They think we live forever." "What do we do?" Kim So-ra asked. "Do we tell them the truth?" Tae-min thought about it and felt his soldier's instincts take over. "If they knew how short human lives are, they might think we are too weak to be useful," he said. "They might send us home or give us safe jobs away from real fighting. Maybe that would be better," Kim So-ra said, but she did not sound convinced. "No," Tae-min said with more confidence than he felt. "Humans earned a place in this alliance by proving we can fight. If we seem weak now, We lose everything our people worked for." They reached their quarters, and Kim So-ra stopped at her door. "Tae-min," she said, "what happens when they find out?" He looked at her and tried to smile. "Maybe they never will," he said. "Maybe we can serve our time and go home and they will never know the difference." But even as he said it, Tae-min knew it was not true. Sooner or later, the aliens would discover that humans were not immortal warriors, but fragile beings with tragically short lives. When that happened, everything would change, and he was not sure it would change for the better. He went into his quarters and sat on his bunk and stared at the wall. Tomorrow, he would begin training with beings who had been soldiers longer than humans had existed. He would fight alongside creatures who saw decades the way humans saw days. And through it all, he would have to hide the fact that every moment might be his last in a way that his immortal squad mates could never understand. 3 months had passed since Tae-min joined Alpha Squad, and the routine of military life in space had become familiar. He woke each morning in his small quarters and performed the same rituals that had kept him sane since leaving Earth: push-ups and sit-ups to keep his body strong. A quick meal from the food dispenser that never quite tasted right. Then reports to the briefing room where Commander Vexathari would outline their missions for the day. The alien members of his squad had grown used to his habits, but they still found them amusing. Sergeant Balneth often commented on how regularly Tae-min performed his energy conversion ceremonies, and Commander Vexathari seemed fascinated by what she called his maintenance schedule. They had been stationed on a small moon orbiting a gas giant for the past month, and the endless patrols were starting to wear on him. "Contact ahead," Private Park Jin-woo said through the comm system. He was positioned on a ridge about 2 kilometers from Tae-min's location, and his voice sounded tired. Jin-woo had been awake for 36 hours straight like the rest of them, but unlike their alien squad mates, he was beginning to show the effects. Tae-min checked his weapon and moved toward the coordinates Jin-woo had given. The moon's surface was mostly rock and dust, with strange crystal formations that grew in spirals toward the pale sky. Their enemy had been using this moon as a staging area for attacks on shipping lanes, and Alpha Squad had been tasked with clearing them out. "I see them," Tae-min whispered into his comm. 3 enemy soldiers setting up some kind of equipment near the Crystal Grove. "Moving to support," came Commander Vexathari's voice. She sounded as alert and focused as she had on their first day, despite not having rested in over a week. Her crystalline body did not seem to need sleep or food or any of the things that kept Tae-min's organic form functioning. The attack came suddenly and with brutal efficiency. Enemy plasma bolts lit up the landscape around them, and Tae-min dove for cover behind a boulder that steamed where the shots hit it. He returned fire with his rifle and tried to keep track of his squad mates through the chaos of battle. "Jin-woo is hit," came Sergeant Balneth's voice, and there was something in the alien's tone that Tae-min had never heard before, something that might have been concern or confusion. Tae-min rolled from cover and sprinted toward Jin-woo's position while plasma bolts sizzled past his head. He found his fellow human lying behind a rock formation with his left leg twisted at an angle that made Tae-min's stomach turn. Blood was soaking through Jin-woo's combat suit, and his face was pale with pain. "How bad is it?" Tae-min asked as he checked the wound. "Bad," Jin-woo said through gritted teeth. "I think my leg is broken and something hit an artery. I can feel myself getting weak." Commander Vexathari appeared beside them, and her crystalline features showed an expression Tae-min could not read. "What is wrong with Private Park?" she asked. "Has his equipment malfunctioned?" "He is injured," Tae-min said as he applied pressure to the wound. "We need to get him medical attention immediately." "Injured." The commander repeated the word like she was trying to understand its meaning. "Will he regenerate the damaged components, or does he need replacement parts?" Tae-min stared at her in shock and realized that she had no concept of human fragility. "He is bleeding," Tae-min said. If we do not stop the bleeding, he will die. Die, Commander Vexathari said, and her voice took on that musical quality it had when she was confused. You mean he will cease functioning temporarily? No, Taemin said and felt panic rising in his chest. Die means he will stop existing forever. His consciousness will end and never return. The commander's crystalline body seemed to dim, and she made no sound for several long moments. Around them the battle continued, but Taemin could only focus on keeping Jinwoo alive while trying to explain mortality to a being who had never experienced it. That cannot be correct, Commander Vexathari finally said. No species in the Alliance has such a limitation. When we are damaged, we repair ourselves or transfer to new forms or regenerate from stored patterns. Humans do not regenerate, Taemin said desperately. We have one body and one life, and when it ends, there is nothing more. Sergeant Balneth's green light appeared nearby and pulsed with rapid fluctuations. The human's energy signature is decreasing, the sergeant said. His biological systems are failing in ways I have never observed. Jinwoo's breathing was becoming shallow and his skin was growing cold. Taemin pressed harder on the wound, but he could feel his friend's life flowing away beneath his hands. The aliens watched with what seemed like scientific curiosity as a human being approached death. Please, Taemin said to Commander Vexathari, call for medical evacuation. There might still be time to save him. The commander activated her comm unit and spoke rapidly in her own language. Within minutes, a medical transport appeared, and strange alien medics rushed to Jinwoo's side. They worked with tools and techniques that Taemin did not understand while speaking in urgent tones among themselves. We have stabilized his condition, one of the medics told Commander Vexathari. But his biological structure is unlike anything in our medical databases. We are not certain how to proceed with treatment. Do your best, the commander said, and contact the human medical officer, Dr. Yoon Hae-jin. She may have knowledge of human repair procedures, as the medical team prepared to transport Jinwoo away. Taemin noticed that all the alien members of Alpha Squad were watching him with new interest. Their earlier casual acceptance of human behavior had been replaced by something that looked like concern, mixed with fascination. Corporal Lee, Commander Vexathari said, after the medical transport had departed. We need to discuss this concept of permanent cessation that you call death. They returned to base and gathered in a secure briefing room where Taemin found himself trying to explain human mortality to beings who had never considered the possibility. He told them about aging and disease and accident and violence and how any of these things could end a human life permanently. But surely your consciousness can be transferred to new bodies, Sergeant Balneth said, or stored in quantum matrices for later resurrection. No, Taemin said. When a human dies, everything that made them who they were disappears forever. Their memories and personality and thoughts all end. The aliens exchanged looks and sounds that might have been distress. Commander Vexathari's crystalline form seemed to vibrate with some internal tension. How do humans function with such knowledge? She asked. How do you perform military duties knowing that any mistake could result in permanent cessation? Taemin thought about the question and realized he had never considered it from that perspective. We try to be careful, he said, and we accept that death is part of life. Part of life, the commander repeated. This is a concept we do not understand. For us, life simply is. It continues until we choose to end it, or some external force destroys us completely. But even then, many of us can return in new forms. Dr. Yoon Hae-jin arrived at that moment, and her presence reminded Taemin that he was not the only human trying to navigate this strange situation. She looked tired and worried and older than her. 35 years. How is Jinwoo? Taemin asked immediately. Stable, Dr. Yoon said. The alien medical technology is remarkable, but they had to learn human anatomy very quickly. They have never treated a species that could not regenerate damaged tissue. Commander Vexathari turned to Dr. Yoon with obvious curiosity. Dr. Wee, have just learned that humans experience something called permanent death. Is this accurate? Dr. Yoon looked at Taemin with surprise and something that might have been relief. You told them, she said. Jin Woo almost died, Taemin said. They needed to understand. Yes, it is accurate, Dr. Yoon told the commander. Humans live for approximately 70 to 100 years, and when we die, our consciousness ends permanently. The room fell silent, and Taemin could see the alien soldiers processing this information. Their earlier assumptions about human behavior were being completely rewritten as they began to understand the true nature of mortality. Every human in this alliance, Commander Vexithari said slowly, serves knowing that death is permanent. Yes, Dr. Yoon said, and you volunteered for military service despite this limitation. It is not a limitation, Taemin said with more force than he intended. It is simply how we are. Sergeant Balneth's light pulsed rapidly, and his voice seemed different when he spoke. You fight alongside us knowing that any battle could be your last forever. Every battle could be anyone's last, Taemin said. That is what makes victory meaningful. The aliens looked at each other, and Taemin could sense that something fundamental had changed in how they viewed their human squad mates. The casual assumptions and friendly curiosity had been replaced by something deeper and more complex. We will need time to process this information, Commander Vexithari said, and we will need to review our tactical procedures to account for human fragility. We are not fragile, Taemin said. We are careful. But even as he said it, he knew that the dynamic of Alpha Squad had changed forever. His alien squad mates now knew that every human in their unit was risking something that could never be recovered. They knew that human courage came from a place their immortal minds could barely comprehend. As they left the briefing room, Taemin wondered if this knowledge would make his squad mates protective of their human members, or... The briefing room aboard the Coalition warship Eternal Vigilance was larger than any space Taemin had seen since leaving Earth. Hundreds of beings, from dozens of species, filled rows of seats that adjusted automatically to accommodate different body types and sizes. The air recycling systems worked overtime to manage the mix of atmospheric requirements, and the result was a strange cocktail of smells and temperatures that made Taemin slightly dizzy. Admiral Keth Mora stood at the front of the room, and her presence dominated the space despite her relatively small size. She belonged to a species that looked almost human, except for the silver skin and the extra set of arms that moved independently of her primary limbs. Her age showed in the intricate patterns etched into her skin and the way she moved with absolute confidence. We have located the enemy's primary stronghold, Admiral Kethemora announced, and the massive display screen behind her showed a three-dimensional image of a fortress built into an asteroid. Intelligence estimates suggest they have been fortifying this position for over 2 centuries. Taemin studied the image and felt his tactical training engage automatically. The fortress was a nightmare of overlapping defensive systems and redundant barriers. Getting inside would require passing through multiple kill zones while under constant fire from weapons that could destroy a small ship. Initial assault waves will need to penetrate 7 defensive layers, the Admiral continued. We estimate casualties in the first wave at 30%, second wave casualties at 45%. By the 4th wave, we should have established a foothold that will allow follow-up forces to complete the mission. Around the room, alien soldiers nodded and made sounds of agreement. Taemin heard several conversations about equipment loadouts and tactical preferences, but no one seemed concerned about the casualty estimates. He looked at the humans scattered throughout the crowd and saw the same expression on every face that he felt on his own. The mission timeline extends approximately 15 years from initial contact to complete victory, Admiral Kethmora said. Casualties who fall in the early phases will have time to regenerate and rejoin the assault before final operations begin. This allows for maximum utilization of experienced personnel throughout the campaign. Corporal Jang Min-ho sat 3 rows. Ahead of Taemin, and his shoulders went rigid at the Admiral's words. Engineer Yang Soo-jin was closer to the front, and Taemin could see her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The other humans in the room had the same frozen quality that came from hearing news too terrible to process immediately. Questions. Admiral Kethimora asked. Commander Vex Athari stood, and her crystalline form caught the light from the projectors. Admiral, what provisions have been made for species that cannot regenerate from combat damage? The question sent a ripple of confusion through the alien audience. Most species present had some form of resurrection or regeneration ability, and the concept of permanent death remained foreign to their thinking. Regeneration support ships will be positioned in secure areas, Admiral Kethimora replied. Standard. Procedure calls for recovery and restoration of all personnel within 6 months of casualty status. Admiral Commander Vex Thari said, with careful emphasis. Some allied species experience permanent cessation when killed in combat. The room fell. Silent, and Admiral Kethimora's 4 arms stopped moving entirely. Her silver skin seemed to darken as she processed the implications of the question. Which species? She asked. Humans? Commander Vex Thari said. Every alien in the room turned to look at the scattered human personnel, and Taemin felt like a specimen, under examination. Admiral Kethimora's ancient eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to disappear. Humans cannot be restored after combat death, she asked. Taemin stood slowly and felt the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon him. No, Admiral, he said. When humans die, we are gone permanently. The silence stretched for long moments before the Admiral spoke again. How many humans are assigned to this operation? 47, came a voice from the back of the room. Admiral Kethimora's expression became unreadable. And all 47 humans understand that participation in this mission carries significant risk of permanent death. Yes, Admiral, Taemin said. Why? She asked. The question hung in the air, and Taemin struggled to find an answer that would make sense to immortal beings. Because the mission is important, he finally said. Because someone has to do it. But you could simply wait for the next cycle, Admiral Kethimora said. When casualties have been restored, and the mission can be attempted again with lower risk. We do not have next cycles, Taemin said. This is the only life we get. The Admiral's 4 arms began moving in complex patterns that might have been a form of communication or simply nervous energy. I need to review the mission parameters, she said. All human personnel report to Briefing Room 7 for species-specific tactical planning. As the crowd dispersed, Taemin found himself walking with Jang Min-ho and Yang Soo-jin toward the smaller briefing room. None of them spoke until they were alone in the corridor. They want to use us as expendable troops, Jang Min-ho said quietly. They think we will throw our lives away because we cannot come back. Maybe we should, Yang Soo-jin said. Maybe knowing we only get one chance makes us more willing to take risks. Or maybe it makes us more careful, Taemin said. Maybe we plan better because we know there are no second chances. They reached Briefing Room 7 and found Admiral Kethimora waiting alone. Her silver skin had returned to its normal brightness, but her expression remained troubled. Sit, she said, and they took positions around a small table. I have been alive for 5,000 years, and in that time I have commanded forces from hundreds of different species. I have never encountered beings who face permanent death and still volunteer for military service. Humans have always been soldiers, Taemin said. Death does not change that. But it should, Admiral Kethimora said. Any rational being would avoid situations that could result in permanent cessation. Yet 47 humans volunteered for a mission with casualty rates that would eliminate 30% of your forces. Yang Sujin leaned forward, and her engineer's mind seemed to be working through the mathematics of the situation. "Admiral, how many times have you died in combat?" The question seemed to surprise the Admiral. "Perhaps a dozen times over the centuries," she said. "Each death was unpleasant but temporary. I regenerated within a few years and returned to duty, with all my memories and skills intact. Humans do not have that option," Taemin said. "So we try very hard not to die. That should make you less effective in combat," Admiral Kethmora said. "Fear of permanent death should cause hesitation and reduce performance, or it makes us fight harder," Jang Minho said, "because we know this is our only chance." Admiral Kethmora activated a holographic display that showed the fortress they would be attacking. "Explain human tactical doctrine for high-casualty operations." Taemin studied the display and felt his mind automatically begin calculating approach vectors and defensive vulnerabilities. "Humans prefer surgical strikes with maximum precision," he said. "We use speed and surprise to minimize exposure to enemy fire. But the fortress defenses make surgical strikes impossible," the Admiral said. "This mission requires sustained assault, under heavy fire." "Then we adapt," Yang Sujin said. "We find ways to complete the mission that other species might not consider," such as Taemin pointed to a section of the fortress where the defensive systems overlapped. "Here," he said, "the coverage pattern creates a blind spot that lasts for approximately 3 seconds, every 90 seconds. A small team could reach the outer wall during that window. The blind spot is only large enough for 1 or 2 individuals," Admiral Kethmora said. "And it leads to a heavily defended section with no tactical value." "It leads to the main power distribution center," Yang Sujin corrected. "If we could place charges there, the entire defensive grid would fail." Admiral Kethmora's forearms moved rapidly as she manipulated the display. "That approach would require someone to remain inside the facility to manually detonate the charges. The individual would not survive. One person dies to save hundreds," Taemin said. "That is an acceptable trade." The Admiral stared at him for a long moment. "You would volunteer for such a mission, if necessary, even knowing you would not return, especially knowing I would not return," Taemin said. "Because it would mean something." Admiral Kethmora deactivated the display and sat back in her chair. "I am beginning to understand why the Galactic Council was so eager to include humans in our alliance," she said. "Your perspective on sacrifice is unlike anything we have encountered." "Will you allow us to participate in the mission?" Jang Minho asked. "I will allow it," the Admiral said, "but not as expendable troops in the main assault. I want human teams assigned to special operations where your unique viewpoint might prove valuable." 3 days later, Taemin found himself in a drop pod with 5 other humans heading toward the enemy fortress. Their mission was exactly what Yang Sujin had suggested: penetrate the defensive perimeter and sabotage the power systems from within. The alien assault forces would begin their attack once the defenses were down. 30 seconds to drop came, the pilot's voice through the comm system. Taemin checked his equipment one final time and looked at his teammates. The medical bay aboard the Eternal Vigilance hummed with activity as alien medics worked to repair damage that their technology was never designed to handle. Taemin lay on a biobed that adjusted itself constantly to accommodate his human physiology, while machines he did not recognize monitored vital signs that the aliens were still learning to interpret. His mission had been successful, but at a cost that left him unconscious for 3 days, with injuries that would have killed him if not for the advanced medical technology of the Coalition. The power grid of the enemy fortress had been destroyed, and the main assault had proceeded with minimal casualties. But Taemin's body bore the evidence of what it meant for a mortal being to accomplish what immortals considered routine. Dr. Choi Eunbi stood beside his bed and reviewed the readings on her medical scanner. She was one of only 12 human doctors, Serving with the Coalition fleet and her expertise in human biology had become invaluable as more aliens began to understand the fragility of their human allies. "Your bone density has increased by 12%, she told Taemin as he slowly regained consciousness. "The alien medical technology repaired your fractures, but it assumed you had a crystalline skeletal structure like the Vex Thari. The nanobots made your bones stronger than human normal." Taemin tried to sit up and felt strength in his limbs that seemed foreign. "Will there be side effects?" he asked. "Unknown," Dr. Choi said. "We are learning as we go. The aliens are experts at repairing their own species, but human biology presents challenges they have never encountered." Commander Vexithari entered the medical bay, and her crystalline form seemed more subdued than usual. She approached Taemin's bed with movements that struck him as almost hesitant. "Corporal Lee," she said, "how do you feel?" "Different," Taemin replied honestly, "but alive." The word seemed to have special meaning for the commander now, and she made that musical sound that indicated deep thought. "We have been studying human biology and psychology since your mission," she said. "The results are disturbing, Doctor." Choi activated a holographic display that showed comparative data between human and alien lifespans. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Where alien species measured existence in millennia, humans counted years in double digits. "The average Vexithari lives 12,000 years, Commander Vexithari said. "The average human lives 70 years. This means that in the time I have been conscious, your entire species has risen from primitive tool users to interstellar travelers." "That sounds about right," Taemin said. "It is impossible," the commander replied. "No species develops that quickly. Most civilizations require hundreds of thousands of years to achieve spaceflight." Dr. Choi manipulated the display to show human historical timelines. "Humans have compressed technological advancement into an incredibly brief period," she said. "We went from the first powered flight to lunar landing in 66 years, from the first computer to artificial intelligence in less than a century." "Why?" Commander Vexithari asked. Taemin thought about the question and realized he had never considered human development from an immortal perspective. "Because we do not have time to waste," he said. "Every generation knows they have to solve problems that previous generations could not fix." Sergeant Balnath appeared in the medical bay as a shifting cloud of green light that seemed more agitated than usual. "We have discovered additional, disturbing facts," the sergeant said in his telepathic voice. "Human soldiers in this operation have been taking risks that no rational being would accept." The holographic display changed to show tactical analysis of the recent mission. Taemin saw his own actions replayed from multiple angles and realized how his assault on the fortress must have appeared to immortal observers. "You advanced through defensive fire that should have stopped any thinking being," Sergeant Balnath continued. "You ignored personal safety to complete objectives that could have been achieved through alternative methods requiring more time." "Time we did not have," Taemin said. "But we did have time," Commander Vexithari said. "We could have waited years or decades for a better opportunity. We could have developed new technologies or waited for the enemy to make mistakes. Humans do not wait decades," Taemin said. "By then we would be old or dead." The aliens exchanged that complex pattern of sounds and lights that indicated private communication. Dr. Choi watched them with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Commander," she said, "may I ask how old you were when you began military service?" "I entered the warrior caste at age 200, Commander Vexthari replied. "I was considered quite young for military duty. Taemin enlisted at age 18, Dr. Choi said. By your standards, he was an infant when he began fighting. 18 human years, the commander said slowly, which would be equivalent to approximately 7 days in Vexithari development. Taemin saw understanding dawn in the aliens' crystalline features and realized the true scope of what they were discovering. You have been fighting alongside soldiers, who are children by your measure, he said. Worse than children, Sergeant Balneth said. Children who know they will age and die before completing a single military campaign. Researcher Velthok entered the medical bay at that moment, and his ancient form dominated the space. He belonged to a species that looked like living stone covered in glowing symbols, and his presence suggested great age and accumulated wisdom. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from deep underground. I have been analyzing human cultural data, Velthok said. The discoveries are unprecedented in galactic history. The holographic display changed to show human art and literature and music spanning thousands of years. Every human generation produces cultural achievements that most species accomplish over millennia, Velthok continued. Your Shakespeare wrote his greatest works in a span of time that represents a brief moment to immortal beings, because he knew he did not have forever, Dr. Choi said. Precisely, Velthok said. Human creativity is driven by awareness of mortality. You produce beauty and meaning and innovation because you know time is limited. Commander Vexathari made sounds that might have been distress. We have been casual about missions and campaigns that represent entire human lifetimes, she said. We have planned operations that would span multiple human generations. Colonel Nam Gi-hun appeared in the medical bay, and his presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. He was the ranking human officer in the fleet, and his weathered face showed the strain of commanding mortals in conflicts designed for immortals. Colonel, Commander Vexathari said, we need to discuss human participation. In military operations, I have been expecting this conversation, Colonel Nam said. Ever since word spread about human mortality, the alien command structure has been re-evaluating our role. How can you justify sending soldiers into combat knowing they face permanent death? Commander Vexathari asked. How can you justify not fighting for what matters? Colonel Nam replied. Every human who volunteered for service did so knowing the risks, but the risks are absolute, Sergeant Balneth said. You cannot return from death to fight again, which makes every battle more important, Colonel Nam said. When you know you only get one chance, you make sure that chance counts. Velthok's stone form shifted slightly, and his glowing symbols pulsed brighter. This explains human military effectiveness, he said. Your tactical innovations and aggressive strategies stem from operating under time pressure that immortal species do not experience. Tae-min struggled to sit up, despite Dr. Choi's protests, and looked directly at Commander Vexathari. Do you want us to leave? He asked. The question hung in the air, and Tae-min could see the commander processing implications that went far beyond military tactics. No, she said finally. But we need to understand what we are asking of you. UI are asking us to be soldiers, Tae-min said. That is what we signed up for. But you are soldiers who face permanent consequences for every action, Commander Vexathari said. Every mission could be your last forever. Every mission is our only chance to make a difference, Tae-min replied. That is what makes it matter. Dr. Choi checked her medical scanner again and frowned at the readings. Tae-min, your neural activity is showing unusual patterns, she said. The alien medical technology has enhanced more than just your bones. Enhanced how? He asked. Your reflexes are faster, and your cognitive processing has increased significantly, she said. The nanobots assumed you had the same enhancement potential as immortal species. Will it affect my lifespan? Tae-min asked. Dr. Choi hesitated before answering. Unknown, she said. But preliminary projections suggest you might live longer than baseline human normal. The irony was not lost on any of them. Alien medical technology had accidentally made a human more like an immortal, just as the aliens were beginning to understand the value of human mortality. How much longer? Commander, Vexathari asked. Potentially double normal human lifespan, Dr. Choi said. Perhaps more. Taemin thought about living for 150 years and realized it still seemed brief compared to the thousands of years his alien squadmates took for granted. But it was more time than he had expected to have, and he found himself wondering what he would do with the extra decades. "Does this change anything?" he asked Commander Vexithari. The great assembly hall of the Coalition headquarters had been expanded 3 times to accommodate the unprecedented gathering. Representatives from 47 species filled the massive space, and their combined presence created an atmosphere of anticipation that Taemin could feel in his enhanced bones. Word of human mortality had spread through the Galactic Alliance like wildfire, and every civilization wanted to understand the implications. Fleet Admiral Zephyria stood at the center of the hall, and her ancient form commanded attention from every being present. She belonged to a species that existed as pure energy contained within crystalline matrices, and her voice resonated through multiple dimensional frequencies when she spoke. "We gather today to address revelations about our human allies that have fundamentally altered our understanding of sacrifice and service," Admiral Zephyria announced. "What we have learned challenges assumptions that have guided galactic civilization for millions of years." Taemin sat with the other human representatives in a section reserved for their delegation. President Lee Dong-wook represented Earth's government, while Major Song Hae-won spoke for human military forces. Around them sat alien dignitaries whose ages spanned geological periods and whose experiences included the rise and fall of entire stellar civilizations. "The species we know as humans," Admiral Zephyria continued, "experience what they term mortality. When a human dies, their consciousness ends permanently, with no possibility of regeneration or resurrection." A ripple of sound and movement passed through the assembled aliens. Even those who had heard the reports seemed to struggle with accepting the reality of permanent death. Furthermore, the Admiral said, "Humans typically exist for 70 to 100 standard years. In the time required for most species to reach intellectual maturity, humans complete their entire existence." Ambassador Krelvox of the Hegemony Worlds raised one of his 6 arms and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "Admiral, are we to understand that every human who has served in our military was risking permanent cessation of existence?" "That is correct. And they volunteered for this service knowing the consequences." "They did." The hall erupted in sounds that might have been amazement, or confusion, or something approaching awe. Taemin watched alien faces and energy patterns and realized that beings who had never experienced urgency were trying to comprehend what it meant to live with constant awareness of limited time. President Lee Dong-wook stood and activated the translation matrix that would allow every species present to understand his words. "Honored representatives," he said, "humans did not volunteer for military service despite our mortality, but because of it. Explain," came a voice from the synthetic collective, whose members existed as uploaded consciousnesses that could transfer between mechanical bodies at will. "When you know that life is finite, every moment becomes precious," President Lee said. "Every cause worth fighting for becomes urgent. Every sacrifice becomes meaningful because it costs something that cannot be replaced." Commander Vexithari rose from her place among the crystalline delegation, and her form caught light in ways that seemed more subdued than usual. "I have served alongside humans for months without understanding the true nature of their service," she said. "Every mission they undertook was performed with the knowledge that failure meant permanent loss, not just of victory, but of existence itself." "How does this affect their combat effectiveness?" asked General Morthak, whose species regenerated from any injury within hours. Major Song Hae-won activated her translation matrix and stood to address the assembly. "Human soldiers fight with intensity that immortal beings find difficult to comprehend," she said. "We do not take unnecessary risks because we understand consequences. But we also do not hesitate when action is required because we know we may not get another chance." Researcher Velthok projected his thoughts through the dimensional speakers that allowed his species to communicate with others. Analysis of human. Military performance shows tactical innovation that surpasses species with millennia of experience, his translated voice announced. This appears to result from necessity-driven adaptation under time constraints. Time constraints, Admiral Zephyria repeated. Perhaps the most foreign concept in this hall. Most species present measure plans in centuries and campaigns in millennia. Humans measure both in years or decades, which forces us to find solutions quickly, President Lee said. When you cannot wait for perfect conditions, you learn to work with available resources. When you cannot rely on regeneration, you develop tactics that prevent damage rather than repair it. A being from the far reaches whose name could not be pronounced. By vocal species projected complex mathematical formulas into the shared consciousness space. The equations showed projections of what human technological and cultural development might accomplish if given the extended lifespans of other species. These calculations suggest, came the translated interpretation, that humans with immortal lifespans would advance beyond current galactic civilization within centuries rather than millennia. But would we, asked Dr. Choi Yunbi, who had been granted permission to address the assembly as an expert on human biology. Everything that makes humans innovative and driven stems from our awareness of limited time. Remove mortality, and you may remove the urgency that powers human achievement. The hall fell silent as immortal beings contemplated the possibility that their greatest advantage might also be their greatest limitation. For species that had never known urgency, the concept that scarcity created value was revolutionary. What do humans want from this alliance? Admiral Zephyria asked. President Lee looked at his delegation and then at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. We want to contribute, he said. We want our brief time in the galaxy to matter. We want to help build something that will endure beyond our individual lives, even knowing that you will not live to see the ultimate results. Especially knowing that, President Lee said. When you know your time is limited, you want to spend it on things that will outlast you. Ambassador Krelvox made sounds that the translation matrix rendered as philosophical confusion. Your species accepts permanent death in service of goals you will not survive to witness. Our species, Taemin said as he stood to address the assembly, has always understood that individuals die, but ideas and achievements can live forever. We fight for things larger than ourselves because we know ourselves to be temporary. And what have you achieved through this perspective? Admiral Zephyria asked. Major Song Hae-wan activated a holographic display that showed human technological progression over the past century. In 100 years, humans developed nuclear power, space travel, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and faster-than-light communication, she said. Most species present required thousands of years to achieve similar advances because you cannot afford to waste time, researcher Velthok observed. Because we know time is precious, Taemin corrected. The assembly began a complex discussion involving multiple translation protocols and dimensional communication methods. Alien voices debated concepts that had never been relevant to immortal civilizations, while human representatives tried to explain perspectives that seemed obvious to mortal minds. Proposal, Admiral Zephyria announced after the discussions had continued for hours. Human perspectives on urgency, efficiency, and innovation will be integrated into coalition strategic planning. Human military units will be assigned to operations, where their unique viewpoint provides tactical advantage. What kind of operations? Major Song asked. Situations requiring rapid adaptation to changing conditions, the Admiral said. Missions where extended planning time is not available. Combat scenarios where immortal species might hesitate due to lack of urgency. You want to use human mortality as a weapon, President Lee said. We want to recognize human mortality as a strength, Admiral Zephyria replied. Your species has shown that knowing life is finite creates intensity of purpose that immortal beings struggle to achieve. Commander Vexathari stood again, and her crystalline form seemed to resonate with internal harmonics. "I request permission to continue serving alongside human personnel," she said. "I have learned more about the meaning of existence in months with humans than in millennia with my own species." "What have you learned?" Admiral Zephyria asked. "That immortality without purpose is emptiness," Commander Vexthari said. "That time without limit has no value. That humans understand something about living that immortal species have forgotten, which is that every moment matters because there are not infinite moments," she said. "That every choice has weight because there are not infinite choices. That every life has meaning because life itself can end." The hall erupted in complex harmonics and translation cascades as species that had never considered these concepts struggled to process their implications. Taemin realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, immortal beings learning from mortal ones. "Motion carried," Admiral Zephyria announced. "Human integration protocols will be developed that recognize mortality as a strategic asset rather than a liability. Coalition forces will be restructured to utilize both immortal experience and mortal urgency." President Lee stood for the final time and looked out at the assembled representatives of civilizations older than human history.